if you want to turn off your cameras, you can, Stephen, if you don't want people to see you. Okay, so let's kneel for prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful, Lord, for another day, another opportunity to learn, to grow, and we are thankful for each person who has been participating in these studies. We ask that you can continue to be with us, that your Holy Spirit can teach us. As we look at Millerite history, and especially the part that Samuel Snow played, we ask, Lord, that we can understand these things that we study. And we pray, Lord, that we can also learn ways to share these things with others in a simplicity, but in a depth that will reach the heart and purge out all the sin that exists in that heart. We ask that you can do this work in our lives as well, and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, welcome, everyone. So our study here is, we've been doing this study on the chronology of Ezra. We started with the first decree, the second decree, and the third decree. And then we went into a study on the prophetic mirror, which I feel is necessary if you really are going to understand Millerite history. That prophetic mirror is extremely important. Now, if you were giving this study to, and I talked about it with some friends of mine who are studying and sharing this message with other Adventists. This study is a very simple one, as I've said, that you can present to a Seventh-day Adventist. You know, starting with the first and second decree, building a foundation of the 70 weeks and the 2,300 days prophetically, the start of those periods. But what I like particularly is when we do that study in 457 and we lay out Ezra's journey from Babylon to Jerusalem, and then we create these two chiasms, and I'm going to go over that again. The nice thing about it is you don't need any calendar converters or any outside information. You can do that study simply from the Bible itself. And sometimes that's a study that you can just approach. You can deal with 457 BC. You can deal with Ezra 7, 7 to 9. You can show the first day of the first month, the 12th day of the first month, the first day of the fifth month, and the 20th day of the ninth month, which are the dates that occur in those chapters. And you can show that journey from Babylon to Jerusalem and the 3 days that are attached with the 12th day of the first month and the first day of the fifth month and the 20th day of the ninth month, and then show those chiasms that exist within them. And that can be done in 1 or 2 studies, depending on the person. But then the next step is the step that we're going to do today, is we're going to look at Millerite history. Now, I sort of did already address that. You know, we looked at the Midnight Cry. We looked at Millerite history a little bit. But, you know, if you're going to do this with somebody, if you're going to present this, you have to really think about what that person knows and understands about Millerite history and how much detail to add based on their scriptural knowledge and their interest. Because you can do it in a very short way, where you can lay out the first day of the first month and the 10th day of the 7th month in 1844. And so that's what I'm going to do right now, is I'm just going to show you, without going through all the Bible verses again, but I'm just going to show you how I would do it if I'm going to present this in the simplest way. And I want to do this because as we start to look at Samuel Snow's letters, we can start to recognize that there's more and more insight that comes as we look at his line. And we're going to develop some of that more in the studies on Sundays. So these studies on Tuesdays, this may be the last one. We might do one more. I'm not certain. And we also covered the week of Christ as well in the previous study. And I wasn't really sure where to present it in all the different studies. But I put it in this one originally back in 2018. And there's a lot more about the week of Christ and the prophetic mirror that could still be understood. And I probably will come back to that again, to the week of Christ, in the chronology studies on Sunday. So I really, I'm thinking I possibly can complete the basic studies here on the book of Ezra, and then any of the more detailed material I can address on Sundays, because we're probably going to keep the Sunday studies going at least maybe to the end of June, I'm thinking. Maybe not all the way to the end, but close to it. So let's look at this now. Now, there was a lot of detail that I addressed. Now, in the third decree, the main verse that I went to address the third decree was the one that Seventh-day Adventists always use, and that's Daniel 9, verse 25. The going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. And so the simple way that I would present this is I would go to Ezra 7 and show that when Ezra leaves Babylon on the first day of the first month, and then arrives at Jerusalem on the first day of the fifth month, that this is reflected in this verse. So the verse says, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment." So the going forth of the commandment would happen in the spring. And then we just say going forth of the commandment to restore and to build. But that word restore is referring to the return of the people. And so it's really to return. So it's the return of the people. So the going forth of the commandment to restore or to return, and then to build. So we put this to build over here. So we have these three steps. And so I emphasize that. And, if I've gone through the first, second, and third decree in detail, I emphasize, of course, the three steps. There's three decrees needed that Ellen White says to initiate, to affirm, and to complete the specifications required for the prophecy to start the 70 weeks and also the 2,300 days. So that three steps would be seen. Now, if I was going to present this, I would probably present that as well. I would focus on this decree, on Artaxerxes' decree. Now, we know then that this is the first day of the first month and that Artaxerxes gave this decree prior to Ezra leaving Babylon. And for Seventh-day Adventists who believe that this is the seventh year of Artaxerxes, starting in the fall, that's not a problem. Because if you know that his seventh year starts in the fall and the commandment is given in the seventh year of Artaxerxes, according to Ezra 7, that decree is given in the seventh year. This seventh year would obviously continue until the fall. But if you were somebody who was believing that you're counting spring to spring for Artaxerxes' reign, then if you had this as the seventh year, you couldn't have this also as the seventh year. This would have to be the eighth year if you were counting spring to spring, because it's really clear that he issues that decree in the seventh year. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that it's really clear. Maybe we could even look at that verse. So let's take a look, because sometimes we make assumptions. And so in the book of Ezra, Seventh-day Adventists have read this different ways, and they haven't always sorted it out. And it came to pass in the fifth month, which was the seventh year of the king. So I got to go back. Okay, so Ezra went up from Babylon. He was already, so this is verse 6. He was already scribe in the law of Moses, which the Lord God of Israel had given. And I guess I'm not sharing the screen properly. Let me try this again. Not sure why. There we go. Verse 6. This Ezra went up from Babylon. So he was in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, right? So he's the son of Sariah. And he was a ready scribe in the law of Moses, which the Lord God of Israel had given. And the Lord granted him all his requests according to the hand of the Lord his God upon him. And there went up some of the children of Israel, and of the priests, and of the Levites, and the singers, and the porters, and the Nethinims unto Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. So you can see this going up occurs in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. So it doesn't actually say that the decree is issued in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. And so, so there's an assumption, which Adventists make, is they'll say that it's in the 7th year of Artaxerxes that this decree is given. No, I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying that that's not what the scriptures say. Now, Ellen White says it's in the 7th year. And it obviously occurs before he leaves Babylon on the first day of the first month, because his journey is also in the 7th year. And so this would indicate that it would be fall to fall. But we can't find that from the scriptures itself. Just reading this, we wouldn't be able to see that. And it says, and he came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. For upon the first day of the first month, began he to go up from Babylon. And on the first day of the 5th month came he to Jerusalem, according to the good hand of his God upon him. For Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law and the Lord, and to do it, the law of the Lord, and to do it, and to teach Israel statutes and judgments. And then we have the copy of the letter from Artaxerxes. So this copy, this letter, focuses on primarily, there's all these gifts that are given. In verse 15, it says they're going to carry silver and gold, which the king and his counselors have freely offered unto the God of Israel, whose habitation is in Jerusalem, and all the silver and gold that thou canst find in all the province of Babylon, with the freewill offerings of the people and of the priests offering willingly for the house of their God, which is in Jerusalem. So we know the temple already exists in Jerusalem. These are offerings for the temple in Jerusalem. And they can also take all these animals as well. So there's a bunch of things that are talked about. But we talked about the fact that the focus of this was setting up magistrates and judges. That's verse 25 and 26. And the penalty and the authority that they have, who will not do the law of thy God and the law of the king, let judgment be executed speedily upon him, whether it be unto death, to banishment, to confiscation of goods, or imprisonment. So there's 4 things that are listed. And we know in Ezra chapter 9 that 2 of those things are going to be put in place for those who don't come to Jerusalem. So now somebody just reading Ezra 7, might get the impression that just he left Babylon on the first day of the first month, and he arrives at Jerusalem on the first day of the 5th month, without knowing the details of what happened. But we know in chapter 8 that we have these other dates. Now it talks about all these different priests, and some of these, the gold and silver is divided amongst the priests to bring to Jerusalem. And in verse 15 it says, I gathered them together to the river that runneth to Ahava, and there abode we in tents 3 days. So this period of time, so he leaves Babylon, but they're going to meet at the river Ahava. So we call this Babylon. And this is going to be on the 12th day of the first month that they're going to leave. And so we find that later. Talks about them weighing the silver and gold as you go through. And it says in verse 31 of chapter 8, then we departed from the river Ahava on the 12th day of the first month to go into Jerusalem, and the hand of our God was upon us, and he delivered us from the hand of the enemy, right? And when they get to Jerusalem, they abide there 3 days, and then they deliver the gold and silver, or the silver and gold. So you're going to have marked at the beginning silver and gold, and then over here you're going to have silver and gold. So the silver and gold is also connected 3 days before and 3 days after. And I dealt with the fact that we could create a chiasm here. Initially, the first chiasm I found, though, was here, and this was from Ezra 9. So this is just a quick review. In Ezra 9, there's this call to people to come to Jerusalem within 3 days. That's chapter 10, pardon me, chapter 10. So Ezra 9 is dealing with the period in between when he arrives and what he sees. And then in chapter 10, he's going to address the fact that they're married to these strange wives. And in chapter 10, verse 7, and they made proclamation throughout Judah and Jerusalem unto all the children of the captivity, that they should gather themselves together unto Jerusalem. And that whosoever would not come within 3 days, according to the counsel of the princes and elders, all his substance should be forfeited, and himself separated from the congregation of those that had been carried away. And then all the men of Judah and Benjamin gathered themselves unto Jerusalem within 3 days. It was the 9th month and the 20th day of the month. And all the people sat in the street of the house of God, trembling because of this matter and because of the great rain. So we have here these 3 days, river Ahava, 12th day of the first month. There's the silver and gold. It's delivered to the temple. There's these 3 days. But prior to the 20th day of the 9th month, we also have the 3 days. So we have 3 periods of 3 days that are mentioned. The first one that we recognized was this one, at the center of this chiasm. Now, if we took it just symbolically 30 days to a month, you would have 140 days, though it's actually 138. And you would have 70 days on either side of this, though it's actually 69. The center date, though, which is important either way, would be the 10th day of the 7th month. So the 10th day of the 7th month, the Day of Atonement, this marks an event that's going to happen at the end of the 2300 days. This is a fulfillment of and this prophecy this year is going to start the 2300 days. And so we've argued that the 2300 days actually start from the center of this chiasm. They end on the 10th day of the 7th month, October 22nd in 1844. Right? So every Seventh-day Adventist knows this. Hopefully, the 10th day of the 7th month. This is October 22nd, 1844. So this is the start of the 2300 days. You have the 23 days starting here, 2300 days starting here. Right? But you're going to have them ending here. I don't know if you can see that. Yes, you can. So they're going to end there. Now, we know that also the 70 weeks start here. Now, my argument is that the 70 weeks start at the same time as the 2300 days. Now, we do have, of course, another chiasm. And that chiasm exists here between the leaving the river Ahava and coming on the first day of the 5th month. So the center of this chiasm is the 6th day of the 3rd month. And the 6th day of the 3rd month is Pentecost. But we know that the 70 weeks and the 2300 days have this 3 steps. And so when we put the to build over here, it's between this, we basically could, I guess, put the to build here if we really wanted to, because it's the center of this chiasm that marks this period of time. We're not going to start from the 20th day of the 9th month to count the 2300 days, and we're not going to start from the first day of the 5th month. But the thing is, we see in Millerite history that this structure exists in a slightly different form, and that we have connections to Pentecost, to the first day of the 1st month, to the first day of the 5th month. We don't necessarily have any direct connections to the 12th day of the 1st month, except indirectly through William Miller's understanding of this date. and how he initially applied it. But it more applies to 33 AD. And so William Miller believed that the 70 weeks commenced here in 457. He called this the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. He believed that that's when the going forth occurred, because Ezra left the river Ahava, which is still in Babylon, on that day. And then he counted 490 years to 33 AD, where he believed that Jesus was crucified at the end of the 70 weeks. And so he would say it was fulfilled to the very day, to the exact day. But Jesus wasn't crucified in 33 AD, and neither was he crucified on the 12th day of the first month. He was crucified on the 14th day of the first month. So that's one of the reasons why I went through the week of Christ in my studies, is sort of to illustrate this, but also the significance of the chiasms. So people in trying to understand that we have these chiasms. So if you're sharing this with somebody, and you're sharing with somebody who isn't familiar with chiastic structures, I would normally like to go back to the story of Jacob and Joseph and show the chiasms there. Now also I could show them the chiasms of the prophetic mirror, but many people don't accept those right away. So by going to the story of Ezra and then showing Christ's week, his covenant week, I can do it without connecting it to the prophetic mirror. I can just show his week. I can show its connections with the counterfeit, the 21260s. Maybe I would leave those out, depending who I'm presenting it to. But the point is, I want them to understand chiasms, that they exist in the week of Christ. So then when I go here to Ezra 7 to 10, and I show them these two chiasms, they already have an idea that there's this idea of a chiasm, and that it's a valid use of Scripture to see a chiasm. But then I'm going to show them the chiasm in Millerite history. So that would be the next step. So I've shown them this. I've set this up, that we have these two chiasms, the 70 weeks and the 2300 days. Both are going to commence on the 10th day of the 7th month. But that connected with the 70 weeks is also this Pentecost, which is when Christ begins the work in the holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, inaugurates his work in 31 AD. So it's about the midst of the week here, not the end of the 70 weeks. So it's not going to mark the beginning of the 70 weeks. It's marking an event at the end. That then is going to, the 2300 days are going to be attached to that date, the 10th day of the 7th month, just as the 70 weeks would. So the 70 weeks would commence here, and so would the 2300 days. So I wouldn't argue that the 70 weeks begins at a different point in 457 BC than the 2300 days do. It wouldn't make sense. Now, of course, we're Seventh-day Adventists, and we already accept that the 70 weeks end in the fall of 34 AD with the stoning of Stephen. But if I was showing this to somebody who didn't maybe understand that, I would want to show the logic of why the 70 weeks are going to commence here, and why this Pentecost date, even though it's the center of a chiasm, is talking about something that's going to happen in the center of the 70th week. Not exactly in the center, but in events connected with it, which with Christ's crucifixion, his resurrection, and then finally his ascension, and then, I shouldn't say finally, his ascension, and then finally, on the day of Pentecost, he's going to begin his work in the holy place as he pours out the Holy Spirit on the disciples. So you can see then that this connection between what happens in 457 BC illustrates events that happen in the midst of the week in 31 AD. But this part of it here also illustrates events in Millerite history. So the events in 457 BC have symbolism or symbolic significance or typology that we could then apply to Millerite history. And that's what you want to show them. And you want to show them the structure. So the structure of these chiasms exist in 457 BC, that when I've shown these to Seventh-day Adventists who understand the 2300 days, They are very amazed just at this one. You know, I mean, this one too, but you show them this, even if you show a Seventh-day Adventist, this part of it, 7 to 10, and just the center of this, that seems very convincing to them that there's something to this chiastic structure, that it's not happenstance. Now, when we look at 1844, we sort of reverse engineered this a little bit. We recognize that Samuel Snow, we took this first day of the first month, we just put it up here, in 1844, and we showed that there's this period of time. This is the end of Miller's 2300 days. You know, it's sunset on the 18th of April. You know, and we can, of course, explain that depending on the person's understanding of calendars. But they do need to understand that if this is the 10th day of the 7th month, that this is the first day of the first month. And we could show it from Millerite writings, depending on how much information we want to give them. And then we would show that, and what I usually do next is I show the first day of the fifth month. Now, this is what everyone knows. Everyone knows about Exeter. I shouldn't say everyone, but anyone who is going to know about Millerite history, they're going to be familiar with this event. Now, it's interesting, Ellen White doesn't specifically talk about this event, but we apply her statement to this event where she talks about midway between the end of their first hopes, and then finally the date, October 22nd. So she says, midway, the message was given in the very words of Scripture, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. So kind of paraphrasing that a bit, it's not her exact words, but she says it's midway. And if you look at this and you think about it, you realize this isn't midway, because this is 4 months to here. And then you're going to have 2 months and 10 days to here. So it's not really midway. Now, there's a lot of things in here that we could show, but the most important thing for them to see is that we have this date, the first day of the first month, and we have this date, the first day of the first month, and the first day of the fifth month. But in this history, we don't have the 10th day of the seventh month mentioned. But the fact that it exists in this chiasm, we can then say, well, it does exist. It just is hidden. And this is another important point for people to realize, that when they're studying the scriptures, that truths are often hidden in God's word. And the fact that we now are finding this should be evidence that God is in some way leading his people at a time that we need to be led, that we need this light for a particular reason. And that reason is that we are now doubting the 2300 days within Adventism. And the 2300 days has been attacked for a long time. But the fruits of that attack are going to be seen in a way that people don't expect. So we will see our ministers rejecting the 2300 days in an open way, that our church is going to have some of its ministry saying the 2300 days is not valid. They'll feel confident to do that because we're going to be dealing with a crisis within Adventism where people are going to show their true colors. And so we need this light here to help us see that the 2300 days is a valid prophetic period, and that it's testified in a way that we never expected, but it was hidden. And so God's starting to give us light upon these prophecies that we've accepted for a long time as Seventh-day Adventists, but now we see there's greater light being added. So this becomes a very unlikely occurrence. This is just more information. When you can see this Pentecost chiasm, it gives a testimony. There's two chiasms. So now as I go up into Millerite history, so we're familiar with Exeter. Now, when we found this was, we say it's 2014. It was presented in 2014 on the camp meeting that started in June 22nd, 2014, that summer. But actually, in August of 2013, I already knew about this. I knew about the first day of the fifth month. But we got distracted. So Jeff brought it up at a Alberta camp meeting in Sylvan Lake. It was a Sylvan Lake camp meeting, which doesn't mean anything to most people, but it was the first week-long camp meeting that in Alberta that we had. And he came up, and Jamal Sankey came up first, and then Jeff came up. And there was a lot of going on that was trying to undermine Jeff by Jamal Sankey, and also to undermine Jeff through another person who was trying to undo or bring discredit to Jeff. And I don't know how much Jeff understood what was happening at the time. But the point was, we understood this in 2013, though we hadn't worked it out in detail. And I remember Jeff bringing up this idea in 2013 that there's 70 days and there's 120 days. So this 120 and 70 became symbols of the priests and the Levites, and the 12 and the 70, and lots of other places that we can find 12 and 7. So that was really important. Now, what I told him at the time is that this is incorrect, because you could look at this way symbolically, 30 days to a month, just like I did here. This is incorrect. Now, this one here we're going to address again, even though we have already addressed it. But, this would be 138, and this would be 69 and 69, because there are months. Every second month has only 29 days, not 30. So that was news to him. He did not know about how the biblical calendar worked. And I wasn't really connected with FFA at all. So it took them longer to figure this out. So it wasn't until 2014 then that they actually figured this out exactly, and how that we could count which date this was. And there was a dispute about it. Originally, when I looked at it too, I wasn't really certain how we were going to count the days. Like, do you count this as the first day? Or it's the 0th day? How do you do that? And so I have to learn how to count, because when we look at this, we're counting this as day 1. This is day 187. So that's an ordinal count. And if we express an ordinal count as a cardinal number, it's what we call inclusive. If we express it ordinally, it's just ordinally. So we can say this is 187 days, which would be an inclusive reckoning. If we say this is the 187th day, that's ordinal. Now, it wasn't until much later that we then divided, so I'll put this here, we divided this period, and we had to use an exact count here. That is, once we had this exact count, we could then count each of those days. And that's what Noel did, is he actually put every single day, laid it out, and showed that if this is the 10th day of the 7th month, then the first day of the 5th month would be August 15th, right? So we got, and I'll do it this way, 15/8. And then we could also show them that this would be, we'll do it this way, 21/7. So that would be July 21st, would be midway. And we found through a roundabout study, because when Loughborough addresses this, he gives us this message where, and I read it last time, where Samuel Snow says that we're in the center of this, we're at midnight, because this period of time is 6 months, and we're just been 3 months in the tarrying time. So now is the midnight, and I'm giving the midnight cry, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. And then the words are added on the 10th day of the 7th month, because I don't think that's what he said. So it's just kind of an encapsulation of what he said, but Loughborough places it here. And so most Adventists, if they're going to be aware of this history at all, are going to think about Exeter, but no one recognizes Boston, except Joseph Bates. Now, he says it was about the 20th of July. So he doesn't know exactly the date, but we get from, and I have the documentation, I think, in the document, in our notes, but it was, unfortunately, Leroy Froome, who gives us this information, and he shows that this was on the July 21st at Boston that he did the Sunday morning service while he was traveling through. Now, so this Boston becomes midnight. And so we then had two symbols. We had midnight, and we had already labeled this as the midnight cry. But you can see he's actually giving the midnight cry here. So when we say it's midnight, it is the midnight cry, but the midnight cry is not empowered till here. So he gives it, and in this period of time, studying is going on. But when he finally gives it at Exeter, even though there's 5,000 people here and there's 5,000 people here, it's not until here that people get it. So these two events, midnight and the midnight cry, we have these two dates, July 27th, and of course this is the 5th day of the 4th month on the biblical calendar. So being the 5th day of the 4th month, we now started to realize, we'd already known that the first day of the 5th month was a symbol, and we, I think it's on the first day of the 5th month that Miriam dies, if somebody can correct me on that. I can't remember. I know it's something to do with Miriam or Aaron. I think it's Miriam dies on that day, but I could be wrong.
I think it's Aaron.
It's Aaron dies on that day? Yeah, okay. So, yeah, so Aaron dies on this day, on the first day of the 5th month. And then we had a hidden first day of the 5th month. When you read in Ezekiel, there's a passage where it talks about on the first day of the month, after Jerusalem, after the walls had been broken down, where the Tyre is mocking Jerusalem, mocking the Israelites. And they're mocking them because, you know, the walls of the city are broken. It doesn't tell us which month it is. So you have to discern that it's actually the first day of the 5th month because of the context. The context is the city was smitten, and now Tyre is going to mock Jerusalem for what happened to them when the walls were broken down on July 18th, 586 BC, which was the 9th day of the 4th month. So on the first day of the 5th month, they're going to mock. Now we know that also the temple is going to be destroyed later on the 10th day of the 5th month. But this would then be referring to the first day of the 5th month. So it's something that you have to, it's hidden. Again, you have some of these things are hidden. This was hidden. So Millerites never took into account what days these were. They never thought, okay, Exeter happened on the first day of the 5th month, and that aligns with 457. They had not that discernment. They actually, even though they had known the first day of the 1st month and the 10th day of the 7th month, they only partially have an understanding of the Jewish feasts. They do notice on the first day of the 7th month that it's the Rosh Hashanah, and they also do mention the Passover, May 2nd. They place it as May 1st, because one of the things that they're doing is they're going by observing the moon. And so they actually get the date wrong for Passover. So they think it was May 1st in 1844, because they didn't really understand how the biblical calendar worked. So I know I'm kind of mentioning a lot of details you're not going to share with people when you do this. But the point is, the first day of the 5th month was a symbol. So the 5th day of the 4th month, when we got this date, we also recognized it as a symbol. And if you've given them a study on Ezekiel, it's a very powerful study where you can connect the first day of the 4th month, the 5th day of the 4th month, to the 10th day of the 7th month, because Ezekiel's first prophecy is given on the 5th day of the 4th month. And if you go to the last date recorded in Ezekiel's chapter 40, verse 1, it's the 10th day of the 7th month. Now again, this one is hidden because it doesn't tell you that it's the 7th month. You have to recognize it's the 10th day of Rosh Hashanah. So that's going to be in the fall, not in the spring. Most commentators, or at least half of them, will say that it's the 10th day of the 1st month, because they'll just take the reading at the beginning of the year. But that Rosh Hashanah, being the 10th day, refers to a Jubilee year in the fall. And the Jewish rabbis recognize Ezekiel 40, verse 1 as being a Jubilee for that very reason. And they recognize it as being the 10th day of the 7th month, where he had his vision. But some Christian commentators don't pick up on that. A lot of people don't. They just read what it says in the Bible and don't bother looking at it. So we have these symbols, the 5th day of the 4th month that we find in Ezekiel, and the 10th day of the 7th month as well. And now the thing is, these become symbols. Now this is a harder sell maybe to show people, but when we look at this period of time here, you can show them that this is 107 days. And you could argue, well, this is also pointing to the 10th day of the 7th month. So that we can do this, that we can take a number and we can say that it represents a date is, there's lots of examples of it. And we have lots and lots and lots of examples of it, of things that are so unlikely that it shows that we can do this. But for somebody who's seen this for the first time, I would show it to them, but I wouldn't put a lot of weight on it. I would just say, it's very interesting that we can do this with these numbers. And I might show them this here first. When I get to this line then, I'm going to show, and I might even tell them this is 54 days, and this is 54 days. Now we can see 54 and 54 don't add up to 107. They add up to 108. But if this is the 6th day of the 3rd month, the Bible calls this the 50th day. And the 50th day goes back to the 16th day of the 1st month as being the 1st day. So if I count this as the 50th day and I go to the 16th day, so I'm going to count backwards, I'm just going to skip over to the 16th day of the 1st month. This would be the 1st and this would be the 50th. So then I would count the 51st day would be the 15th day, the 52nd would be the 14th day, the 53rd would be the 11th day, and then 54 days would bring me to the 12th day of the 1st month. So I can show that this is just, if I say it's 54 days, it's inclusive, it's the 54th day. And then when you count this, you can see it's 107 days. So altogether from here, but I'm not counting this as one when I count the 107 days. I'm just doing this as a normal cardinal count. So, but these two symbols then, if I've shown them this and they've accepted this, you know, maybe they didn't, or they just thought it was weird, but I get here and I show that this is the center of this chiasm, and he's here predicting this event, but on the 5th day of the 4th month, predicting the 10th day of the 7th month, then, you know, some people will accept this, some people won't. Again, it's not the major argument, but I would want to show people that because I want them to understand that these are now symbols and they can be used in other ways. That we can see those numbers show up in again and again in different ways. So, and they become very unlikely that they show up in the way that they do. So to me, this is a very foundational presentation for us to do a lot of the other things we do in our predictions dealing with July 18th, where we can take 187 as representing July 18th. And we also know, and we showed this, that when we add 11 and 54 and 15 and 107 together, when you take these as numbers, you get 187. And I would also really emphasize with people, when I'm showing them Millerite history, that this is 187 days, right? I want them to get the idea of this symbol. And then I would maybe even show them this. You can add these together and also get 187, because we do this. But where we started doing this wasn't necessarily with this date, but we did have numbers as symbols, or dates as symbols, and we found that we could add things together. So this wasn't the first place we did this, but this is something that definitely would be foundational for Adventists. If you could show them this, then they would be able to see that this is not something that's chance. And I said I could also do it in this history, because in this history, these are all the dates that are given us in this year. There is one other one, I guess, which I failed to mention, which is the 10th day of the 1st month. Now that's when they begin. From here, they meet and they decide to deal with the strange wives, and they begin on the 10th day of the 1st month. And now if I take the 0 out of here and I add these up, I don't include this one and I don't include this one, but the dates that are given us in the Bible are the 1st day of the 1st month, the 12th day of the 1st month, the 1st day of the 5th month, and the 20th day of the 9th month, and the 10th day of the first month. And when I add those together, 11 plus 121 plus 15 plus this one would become 29 plus, and this one would be 11. I've taken out the zeros. It equals 187. So the fact that I can do this, now this is an example of taking out the zeros, which again, some people had a hard time with. But the fact that I can even do this and come up, and I can do it here and come up with the same number, cannot just be, well, people can dismiss it, but to me, it's not logical to dismiss it. You would have to say that that is design. So it's one of the examples that I can use to show that we can remove the zeros. The zeros are not significant because they're nothing, right? You're removing nothing. But in this one, we do keep the zero. So somebody can say, well, you're inconsistent. You know, here you kept the zero, here you took it out. So you'd have to decide whether you want to show somebody this as evidence or not. But anyway, these are the connections that we would then see between 457 and 1844. Now, of course, this is a study on Samuel Snow's letters. And this is where I think it became, for me, very, very interesting as I started looking at Samuel Snow's letters. So I'm going to erase this bottom part here because I'm going to need that space. So it's obviously in your notes. Much better diagram than this. Now, some of those things aren't in the notes. The adding up of the dates aren't in the notes because we weren't doing that at that time. I was using, though, of course, the 5th day of the 4th month being 54 days and the 10th day of the 7th month being 107 days. So I'm going to, I probably should have left that there, but I just need more room. So maybe I'll put it back here a bit lower. So what we had happen, though, when we went through the story, so I'm going to put this back. Just a sort of the dates that we had, not all of them, just the ones in the Bible. So we have the 20th day, the 9th month. So in this story of the decree, so this is 457. So this is not really the same year, but I'm going to put this here. We also know that we had other dates that were given us. One of the dates that was given us in Ezra were the dates of dealing with the decrees. But the most important ones to me are the ones that happened in 515. So I'm going to put these dates here. And so this is just going back to Ezra chapter 6. So let's go back to that verse and just remind ourselves about it. So in Ezra 6, and this is verse 14 and 15 and on. So I'll share the screen. Remember to unshare it. It says, and the elders of the Jews builded and prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. And they builded and finished it according to the commandment of the God of Israel and according to the commandment of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month, Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. So we did address that. And I'll read the other one and then I'll write this down. So we have that 3rd day of the month, Adar. Adar is the 12th month, and it is in the 6th year of Darius, which we can date exactly. And the children of Israel, the priests and the Levites and the rest of the children of the captivity, kept the dedication of this house with joy, and offered at the dedication of this house of God 100 bullocks, 200 rams, and 400 lambs. I've never found the significance in these numbers. What they mean, they probably mean something, but I just haven't figured out what they mean. And then it says in verse 19, and the children of the captivity kept the Passover on the 14th day of the 1st month. So when we look at this history, then, we can date these things. So they dedicated, now this is in the year 515 BC, and so 515 BC is still in the 6th year. So in the 6th year, in the summer, he would have issued, and I've shown this from the Spirit of Prophecy, her statements regarding the 1st decree and the 2nd decree, that it would have to be in the summer of 516 BC that Darius issued his decree. And of course, that's going to allow for the completion of the temple. This is still in the 6th year because his year isn't going to begin until the 1st day of the 1st month in 515 BC. But this is on the 3rd day of the 12th month. So in 515, if you look up the 3rd day of the 12th month, it's March 12th, which is an inversion, because we would see this as, on our calendar, as the 3rd month, 12th day. So it's an inversion of it, or we could go 12th day, 3rd month. The numbers are the same numbers, that just one refers to the day, one refers to the month. And I noticed this, I think back in 2014, and I thought it was very interesting. It might have been 2015. But anyway, I kept this in my mind, this idea that I could have a date where the date would match inverted. An example of another way, and this is sort of an aside, it's just one, I've never figured out the significance of it, but my oldest brother John's married, he's born on September 26th. And September 26th is the only day in the year where if you count from January 1st, the number that you get is it's the 267th day of the year. And if it's a leap year, it's I think it's the 267th on a leap year, and it's 267 days. I can't remember. I think it's the 267th day. But 269th, pardon me. September is the 9th month there. I always think of it as 7. So this is 269. So 269 days from the beginning of the year to September 26th. It's the only date in the year that does that. I know it might not be significant to people, but we do count on the biblical calendar the days of the year, which dates are counted, so we can count all the days of the year. For instance, the 187th day of the Jewish year is the 10th day of the 7th month, so that connects 10th day of the 7th month to the number 187. So we can do that on our calendar as well. So this is just an interesting point of what I see when I look at calendars. So when I saw this date, I recognized that this was a relationship between a biblical calendar and our calendar that is rare. Doesn't happen very often. There's not many dates that you could actually have this occur. I tried to figure it out one time. It was too complicated because the Jewish calendar can start on different days. But as far as I could tell, there's only one other date, I can't remember which one, where this could occur. But it doesn't occur every year. So I think the odds is that there are 2 different dates where I can do this on the biblical calendar that will line up with our dates on our calendar. And there's 365 days on our calendar, and there's 365 on theirs. So you do this math and you can figure out the probability. But I wasn't sure about whether I had checked every possibility. But this is very rare. So to have our calendar do that is rare. Now, so this drew my attention to it. Now, later on, when I was studying Samuel Snow's letters, I noticed this date shows up, and we're going to look at that. Now, the other thing is you have this period of time from the 3rd day of the 12th month to the 14th day of the 1st month that's mentioned where they keep the Passover. So you're going to have this Passover. So this date becomes really important. And this ends up being, I think it's 40 days or something between the time they dedicate the temple to the Passover. I think that's the number. And they're connected. So this is in Ezra 6. Now, we're going to have this relationship happen in Samuel Snow's letters. So these are the things that I would want to draw people's attention to. I would want them to know about this if I'm going to do Samuel Snow's letters. Now, if I'm just doing Millerite history and I want to give them these dates, this is sufficient. But to me, this is an important dates because they're going to show up in Samuel Snow's letters. So I'm going to see how much time we have. Yeah, so we got a fair bit of time, so we can cover some of this here before we take our first break. So let's go to, if you have them, Three Angels Messages source book. And I think I sent you guys a correction of it. I know I corrected it, where I corrected the table of contents. So, and I don't like using this one. So in the Three Angels Messages source book, if I didn't, you guys need to remind me to do that, to send you my correction. But I think I did. So now, so yeah, because the table of contents was wrong. I actually reorganized the order of some of the letters because they weren't chronological. And so we went through this last time. We went through the basic letters, how they were dated. But now we're going to draw these on the line. And I'm also going to explain a little bit of how this came about, because to me, part of the issue was how things unfolded, how God unfolded this message to us. To me, that's part of the story. So maybe I'll tell that story first before I open up this file and share it here. Now, when we get into our history, in 2017, we have some events unfold. So I'm going to erase this again, try to get our line in here a bit. Now, of course, we know 2017 was a really important year. Because on January 14th, 2017, this is Glen Park. These are the Glen Park meetings dealing with Penium. These are in Alberta. Glen Park, Alberta. Near Warburg, where I go to church. And so Penium was opened up here on January 14th, 2017. But there was a lot happening here. For us personally, at least in Alberta. We had Parminder come and do a series of meetings, a weekend retreat, and then he did a School of the Prophets, prophecy school, where they had students, and they did that for a few weeks. And my life was changing as well. I ended up moving away from Warburg for a while. And so there are some significant dates that show up here in 2017 in connection with my life and the message. But the one that I really want to mark here is May 2nd. Now, when I say May 2nd, it's not really so much that date is significant. It was happening at that date, but we had this prediction before midnight. And during this time in May, Tabo was presenting this prediction before midnight. And he presented it, he used Ezra chapter 8, dealing with the river Ahava and the 3 days. Now, he never addressed the other period of 3 days, the 3 days of the gold that being brought to the temple, and he never addressed the 3 days in Ezra chapter 10. He just addressed the 3 days from the river Ahava. And he used 3 days as this idea of a prediction before midnight. Now, the other thing that he talked about was also the story of Joseph, the dreams of the butler and baker, where there was 3 days. And there were some other studies that he gave also where he addressed that 3 days was a symbol of the prediction before midnight. I think he used some things from the life of Christ, maybe even Jonah. I can't remember all the 3 days that he used. It wasn't well received. That is, it was discussed at the school of the prophets. A lot of people held on to it longer than others. I never abandoned this because when October 13th happened, I saw that we were fulfilling the prediction before midnight, and especially when we got to the July 18th prediction. But by then, this had been really lost sight of. Nobody was talking about the PBM. Now, the idea of the prediction before midnight came from Samuel Snow's May 2nd letter in 1844. So to put this letter here, we know this is April 19th. So I'm just going to put May 2nd here. I might not have enough room for everything here, but this is his May 2nd letter. Now, this is the letter where he presents the midst of the week. So this is the letter that it's published on Passover. So this is also Passover. And this is the correct Passover according to this line. Now the Millerites, for some reason, and I'm not sure why, because they had at sunset April 18th, that the first day of the first month began. And it could be that they were arguing on May 1st at sunset the Passover began. But if you look in Millerite writings, they will say in 1844 that May 1st was Passover. So they may just be counting it the way that you would count it biblically. That is, at sunset on May 1st, Passover began. And that's when you would offer the Passover lamb. So I'm not sure if that's what they understood or if they didn't quite understand the calendar. So I can't say for certain what they were thinking about. But anyway, there is also a May 1st letter of Snow's. And there's a May 2nd letter, of course, is the one where he's dealing with this prediction. So he's dealing with this prediction before midnight. And he shows that Jesus was crucified in the midst of the week. Some of his arguments are a little flawed. If you read this article, you'll see that he doesn't have the view that we hold now regarding the start and the ending events of this 70th week. But it's interesting that he's talking about the Passover in 31 AD on a date that is the Passover in 1844. So to me, there's just significance in that in and of itself. Now, originally, this was just the second letter that we found of Samuel Snow's. The first letter that we had of Samuel Snow's was a letter that was written over here, and this was on the 16th. I probably need to move this over a bit more. So this is on the 16th of February, so February 16th. So this letter here is, it's written here, so I'm just going to put a W, and it's going to be published here on February 22nd. So on February 22nd, it's going to be published. Now, so this here is the first time when you look at his August 22nd, the True Midnight Cry publication, it's totally revised. His views that he expresses here are very, very different. Who the king Artaxerxes is, here he has Artaxerxes. He believes that it's Xerxes. So he puts this connected with the story of Esther, Artaxerxes. So some things really, really strange that he does in this first writing of it. But considering he didn't have the internet and all the resources that we have, it's pretty remarkable how he came to understand things as closely as he did. He just didn't have all the resources. So now he didn't have this yet. So he didn't have the midst of the week back here. This is something that came to him somewhere between here and here, that he came to understand this. And this is really essential to understanding the whole structures of chiasms and everything. But also his argument for the 10th day, the 7th month becomes much stronger with this midst of the week idea. So he's dealing with some start of this argument, but this is the argument that he uses to nail down this. He also deals much more with typology in this study that happens here than in the study here. Now, we also have his second letter. His first letter is republished, and it's going to be republished on April 3rd. Now, these dates are very significant because in the Jews in 1844, both the rabbinical and the Karaite Jews kept this date as the Passover. So this is the Passover for the Jews in 1844. And that's because they started their year on March 21st in 1844, and they didn't add an extra month. They didn't add a 13th month. The Millerites did. So you're going to have their first day of the first month over here, and we're going to have our first day of the first month over here. So it's probably not in proportion, but you see what I mean. So you're going to have here, I'm going to move this over a little bit. 14th day of the first month. The Jewish Passover is going to be here, 14th day, first month. Now, and this is April 3rd. So it's April 3rd, 1844. Now, this is when his letter is republished. So it's republished, and here it's going to be in the Signs, and here it's going to be in a publication called the Midnight Cry, with an exclamation mark. So the Midnight Cry, February 22nd, he's going to have it published the first time. And we saw last week, we read that it was published in the Signs, and they put a disclaimer. So I didn't put both issues, I just put the disclaimer from the April 3rd one with it. Now, the date here is significant because on the biblical calendar, this is the third day of the 12th month. So one of the things I noticed is it was the same date in Ezra 6. So this is the date of the dedication of the temple. And then what we have is we have this period of time that's here. Here it's 40 days. Here I believe it's 41. But we have this period, well, it's actually to this false Passover. So you're going to have this dedication of the temple and this Passover in 515 BC are going to be parallel to this letter being published and then republished in that same relationship, third day of the 12th month to the 14th day of the first month. Of course, this is the 14th day of the 13th month in 1844, but according to the Jews, this is that same relationship. So you're going to have this date here and this date here in Ezra 6 and in Millerite history. So it becomes very, very significant that this occurs. And the chances of this occurring are not likely. First off, I believe the Signs is published on a Thursday and the Midnight Cry. No, this is published on a Wednesday. This is published on a Thursday. Yeah, because the Sign comes one day before. So like this May 2nd letter, for instance, there's a May 1st letter published in the Signs on a Wednesday. And then on Thursday, he has his May 2nd letter published in his second letter, right? So you have the fact that these publications are published on these dates that you have no control over, and then he's going to have it published on these two dates. And then he's going to have his second letter also published on Passover. So Samuel Snow has no idea at this time on how these calendars work. He has no control over which day they're published on. So the fact that they occur in this structure is highly unlikely. And I could figure out the odds for this because this is kind of objective. You could figure that out. And it would be very, very, very unlikely that you could have this structure. So this ties the second decree with Millerite history, just as we tied the third decree with Millerite history. So very, very, very significant. Now, we know that this is his second letter, but there's also going to be a third and a fourth letter. So now this second letter being May 2nd, I'm going to address this here, but we're going to look at the notes. We're going to look at these letters. I'm going to deal with the third and the fourth letter as maybe in the second part of this. But the point that I want to make here with this May 2nd, so where in this history in 2017, Samuel Snow's letters are unfolding to us. Now, we all knew about his first, well, at least I did. I knew about his first letter for a long, long time. But this second letter I had not known about. And so when Tavo brought this up, what he tried to say is that May 2nd is the prediction before midnight. Now, he wasn't attaching this to the date that we were in, but in this history, this is what he's teaching. So on May 2nd, I mean, before this and after this, he was teaching about this PBM. But I noticed that there are significant events, which I'm not going to go into, that we can tie this symbol of May 2nd into 2017. And so what I saw is that 2017 was the unfolding of Samuel Snow's letters. And there are significant dates in 2017 that we can tie in. So we're gonna fill this in as we go along. So 2017 is tied to Millerite history in a very special way. And so that's all I can say for it right now. I want to jump ahead. But so when we look at these letters, and we did touch on them a little bit, we have this May 2nd letter. We have this. So I could see that the publishing of these letters was significant. What I didn't have is I didn't have a significance for the writing of any of these letters, and no reason to look at that. So the fact that it was published on February 22nd, it was republished on April 3rd, and the second letter is published on May 2nd. To me, it was just the publishing dates. We're going to start to realize that the writing of these letters are also connected in other ways. So these obviously become significant, very unlikely. And so let's just take a look at these letters again from what we had last time. Now, there's a lot more to Samuel Snow's letters than what because there are letters that occur in 42 and 43, but I'm not going to go through those letters. But I suggest people read them. They're very, very interesting. So when we get here, you can see, I'm just going to skip through these. So here is his February 2nd letter, which I showed you last time. And he's going to have the John the Baptist, and he's going to deal somewhat with the end, but he's not going to deal with the center of the 70th week. He's not going to deal with 31 AD in this letter. So he's going to deal with the 70 weeks, but he's not going to address it. And there, of course, we have the disclaimer at the end. It's either Joshua V. Himes or Bliss who writes this, because Joshua V. Himes is the publisher, but Bliss is also one of the editors. So one of them wrote this, and they could have maybe written it together and agreed upon it. We don't know. And then this is Brother Snow's letter from May 1st. And this is after the first disappointment, where he talks about these people. And it's a very, very important letter. And we could argue that this is also attached to the May 2nd letter, because as we noted, the Passover began at sunset on May 1st. And that's the date that the Millerites mark as the Passover. So, you know, I would say that I would attach these together, but I don't normally address the May 1st letter. But it is important. And I think it testifies to a lot of the, and I'm probably going to address it in more detail on when we get into some more detail regarding the significance, because we're not going to deal with that here. We're not going to go into all the implications of these letters. We're mostly just laying them out, but I will be laying them out again. And then we told you that in his May 2nd letter, he used the death warrant of Jesus Christ as his basis. So here he now introduces the midst of the week. So he doesn't do that till May 2nd. He doesn't do that in his first writing. And then we also know that William Miller has published in the Signs on May 2nd his, what I would call an apology and defense, but it would be his first one dealing with the first disappointment. And so this apology and defense says it's May 2nd that it's written, whether it was, we know it was published on May 2nd, so I find it interesting. At least I believe it was published on May 2nd. And if you go to the table of contents, if I've done them correctly, it will tell us where it was published. So the Midnight Cry, when we get Miller's May 2nd letter, it was published, it says it was dated May 2nd. So I'm not sure where it's published, so I don't have that information, but it's dated May 2nd. So we have that connected with it as well. Now, where we want to go to next is to look at his third and his fourth letters. So we'll take a look at them first. Now, this is his third letter. It's a letter from Samuel Snow, The Midnight Cry. It's published June 27th, 1844, written to Brother Southard. And this one is written on June 22nd. So it becomes really important, this date. And you can see why it's important when we just stop the share here. So he's going to have another letter here that's going to be published on June 22nd. I'm just going to have to put it here. June 22nd becomes a really important date. First off, it's the 6th day of the 3rd month. So this is Pentecost. And so this ties us back to this line which I erased again. But the center of that chiasm from the first day of the 12th month to the first day of the 5th month, those 3 days before and 3 days after, is Pentecost, the 6th day of the 3rd month. And so when I found this one, the fact that these now we had another letter lining up on a significant biblical date, it added to the impossibility of this being merely chance. Now, later on, the problem that I had with this one is it was the writing of the letter. So these ones were the publications of the letter, but this one was the writing of the letter. And it's published on, just get it right here. So it's going to be published on June 27th, as you saw. And so June 27th is the 11th day of the 3rd month. And at first I didn't understand this. Like, I mean, I could have if I'd thought about it, but I didn't. I just had this June 22nd and this June 27th. And I looked at it as the 11th day of the 3rd month. It didn't mean anything to me at first because this was not a significant biblical date. But I recognized that if I doubled it later on, that it became the 22nd day of the 6th month, which is the day it was written, June 26th. So that I could take this biblical date, double it, and it became the Gregorian date of when it was written. So that seemed really unlikely that you could do that with a date. And of course, this idea of these dates having these symbols came all the way back when I first saw this 3rd day of the 12th month being March 12th, that I could relate a biblical date to an inversion of a Gregorian date or Julian date in this case. So that was very strange, you know, to see that type of thing occurring. Now, we're going to see that this date here, June 22nd, we're not going to see it now, but June 22nd, 2017 becomes an extremely significant date in connection with our prediction of July 18th, 2020. But we didn't know that back then. So June 22nd is important. I don't have an event here, but it's part of a structure. And so June 22nd becomes this structure. And we're also going to have another date later on as well that's important in 2017. And the problem here is that these dates in 2017 are more connected with me than connected, at least I can't connect a lot of them with other events, but I can connect them with myself. But the point is, so 2017 becomes important in relationship to the fact that I'm going to unfold Samuel Snow's letters. Right? So when I actually present this is September 23rd. (2017). And September 23rd, 2017, I present at Lambert Samuel Snow's fourth letter, which becomes really significant. So we know that May 2nd is this center of this, or is this prediction before midnight, and we're going to show how it's a center of a chiasm as we go through this, and we'll show how this all fits together. So we're going to just take a little bit of break, just take a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back to our study. And I'm just going to pause this for now. Dear Father in heaven, we just invite again your Spirit. Please teach us and help us to understand these things, keep them in our minds, and help me to present these things simply. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'm gonna just draw the line with Samuel Snow's letters itself. I'm going to erase this 2017 line and just try to get these in our minds. So we know that I'm just going to put January 1st here, 1844. This is the day that Samuel Snow decides that he's going to present the idea that Jesus is coming back in the fall and not in the spring. Miller's prophecies reach to April 19th, technically at sunset on the 18th, on the first day of the first month. But Samuel Snow knows this even before January 1st, and on January 31st, he speaks at Boston and gives his personal testimony of his experience in the message. So that's also significant, that he ends off the year 1843 with a personal testimony, and then the next day decides that he's going to give this new light that he has. Now, he's going to then write a letter, and that's going to be on February 16th. And so on February 16th, this letter that he writes is going to be published 6 days later on February 22nd. And February 22nd is going to be the biblical date, the third day of the 12th month. And that third day of the 12th month is the dedication of the temple in 515 BC. So it's going to be published, it's going to be written, and then it's going to be published in the Midnight Cry. And then it's going to be republished, I think 41 days later, on April 3rd. And that's going to be the 14th day of the first month on the rabbinic calendar, right? Because it would be the 14th day of the 13th month on the biblical, because they don't add that extra year. So this is going to be published in the signs. So it's going to be published in the signs. And then he's going to have his second letter. So we're just going to call this his first letter. And then what we call his second letter is published May 2nd. Now, technically, you could include his May 1st letter, But this is the 14th day of the first month. 14th day of the first month. And this is the Passover. So here, this is a Passover, but it's the wrong Passover. And this is a Passover, but it's the correct Passover, according to the biblical calendar. So he has this first and the second letter, and then we know that he also has a third letter. Now, the third letter is written on June 22nd, and that happens to be Pentecost, the 6th day of the third month. So we now have the dedication of the temple, the false Passover, the correct Passover, and now Pentecost, all connected with Samuel Snow's letters, a very unlikely occurrence. So in these three letters, these were actually the letters that we had. And I'm not sure how, I know that different people found them. I think I was actually the one that found the June 22nd one, but I'm not 100% certain. They weren't easy to find. We had to really dig them up. And then I had to continue scouring all these Midnight Cries and Signs of the Times for all these other articles to find any article that Samuel Snow had written, any point, that any place he was mentioned. So it took a while till I was convinced that I had found all the letters. Now, the final letter was July 18th. Now, when I didn't find this one, I know that. And this one occurs 3 days before July 21st, before Boston. And this is why I was mentioning Tabo, because the significance of this 3 days, well, when I found July 18th, and this is called confirming the covenant. So if you think about the significance of each of these letters, the topics of them, this first one, of course, is just introducing the idea that Jesus is coming back on the 10th day of the 7th month. But then, it's associated with these Passovers on either side of the first day of the first month, which is a symbol in our line, a dividing line between two classes. And I would look at this, and I'm going to deal with this in other studies in more detail, but I saw there was a significance why there was these two Passovers were included. And then to have this Pentecost letter, with Pentecost being a symbol of organization, of God establishing his church in 31 AD, and the June 22nd date became a very powerful symbol as well later on. But at first, it wasn't really much of a symbol, it was just a date. It didn't have anything to attach to it as a symbol. And then we saw how it was published. So this was when it was written. So it's going to be written, and then it's going to be published in the Midnight Cry. And that's going to be on June 27th. So June 27th, it's going to be published. So it's written, published. But that date is the 11th day of the third month, because it's 5 days later. 5 days between June 22nd and June 27th. Now, I did address before in some of my other studies how June 26th and June 27th represent 622 and 627 from Ezekiel. Those dates in Ezekiel are important. And we can see that they're really one date. Dilio does a study where he shows that they're connected. But we can see also if we just double this, it gives us June 22nd. So this little, what I call a Gordian knot. Now, usually there's an expression called cutting the Gordian knot, where you have this impossible puzzle and knot, and you cut it. And that's sort of what I saw happen here. When I realized I could double it, and the significance of that, that became a key that unlocks all of these letters. So when I get to the fourth letter, so you're going to have his second letter here, his third letter here, and then finally his fourth letter. Now his fourth letter, the publication date is July 18th. And I would argue that the publication dates are the most important dates of these letters. The date that it's written is June 29th. So it was actually written quite a long time before they finally published it in the Midnight Cry. So it's about 3 weeks from when it was written to when it was published. And he got this one published within 5 days of when he wrote it. So I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe there was some, questioning about what he was teaching. I don't know. But it finally got published 3 days before midnight, before Boston. And it seems to me that this would be the reason that he was invited to speak, because he was invited to speak at Boston, because he wasn't there for very long. So it's not like they could have written a letter. He was just passing through Boston. So I would think it was because of this letter here that he was then asked to speak on the Sunday morning service at the Boston Tabernacle to about 5,000 people. So when I saw this, though, in the 3 days, I connect this with the prediction before midnight. And I was in Eatonville presenting July 18th as the prediction before midnight. Now, July 17th also has some other interesting things that occurred. I was in Eatonville in February of 2017, so I don't have the 2017 line here. But 2017 had all these events where I was connected. I ended up in Eatonville, and I need to figure out the date. I can't remember the date offhand. But I ended up in Eatonville around this time of February, sort of the end of February. And I talked with Jeff. It's the first time I actually talked with Jeff for an extended period of time. Even though I'd been at the School of the Prophets in 2016, I had a talk with him in the Strawberry Patch once, but really never had a talk with him to the depth that I had here when I was in Eatonville. And I also presented in Eatonville in the summer of 2017. And I also ended up back at the School of the Prophets in 2017, where I presented Samuel Snow's letters and biblical chronology. But it was Samuel Snow's letters that I presented on September 23rd that are going to be significant. Not here in this study, I'm not going to go through that. But I just want to show you that Samuel Snow's letters became an important part of my life personally in 2017 because of the events that happened. So anyway, when I got to this July 18th letter, and it would have been in June and July that I was studying this. So when I got to the July 18th letter, I presented this in Eatonville. And I was presenting this as the prediction before midnight. Now, I ended up going back to Alberta, and we had a camp meeting where Jeff was presenting. And while he was presenting in Alberta, Dwayne Dewey was presenting at the School of the Prophets. And Dwayne was attacking Tabo's May 2nd understanding of the prediction before midnight. That is, he's saying the May 2nd letter is not the prediction before midnight. It's the July 18th letter. Now, Dwayne was doing this because I was presenting the July 18th letter. So, and this was in August of 2017, I believe. I need to actually check out some of these dates because there might be some significance when different things happened. We don't have Dwayne Dewey's presentation up. It was taken down. When Jeff got back, he was pretty upset that Tabo was being attacked by Dwayne. At least that's how it was perceived. Whether Dwayne meant it as an attack or not, it's just kind of his personality. But he was saying that this is the correct prediction before midnight. So there was this whole controversy over this. Now, what I ended up recognizing that I presented in the fall, in September, in Arkansas, happened to me in a dream. And so in a dream, something happened. Now, this had happened quite a bit earlier, so I can't remember the exact date that the dream occurred. But I was dreaming about these dates, all these dates on this line. And the one that bothered me, the only one I could not find any significance, even the writing of the July 18th was June 29th, as I said. And if you look in Ezra's line, June 29th is June 29th is Pentecost. So I could attach this June 29th because Pentecost is the 6th day of the third month in 1844. but it's 7 days difference in 457. So June 29th is Pentecost in 457, not June 22nd. So I could tie that to Pentecost. So I could kind of tie all this together. The date that I couldn't do anything with was this February 16th date. I couldn't find any significance about it. And it bothered me that this had occurred. And I'm not sure. I really wish I had kept a journal of when I found things out. But anyway, I knew about this controversy that was happening even before it happened. So I'm not sure. I think it was actually before it happened that I figured this out. But I had the answer to it in the fall, where I showed them. So this July 18th letter becomes really significant to me. But, so I was pointing towards July 18th, but I was trying to reconcile this May 2nd as being prediction before midnight. And I couldn't do it. I didn't understand I knew all these dates and I knew the significance of the dates, but I didn't know the significance of February 16th. So what ended up happening is I went to sleep, and as usual, when I have a problem, I end up dreaming about it all night. And so I kept dreaming about this February 16th. And in my dream, I was converting it into Roman numerals. I was doing all kinds of strange mathematical formulas and so forth, and I was getting nowhere. And then all of a sudden I heard a voice say, double it, right? So this was very strange to me to hear this double it. And I woke up. It was probably, when I say all night, I was probably like 2 in the morning or something like that when I woke up, 2 or 3 in the morning. And so I went to the whiteboard and I wrote the date like this: 2nd month and the 16th day. And then I just doubled it. I added the 2nd month and the 16th day to each other. Now to do that, I'm starting with February, and so I'm going to count March and April. So that's going to give me we'll go 4 months. We'll just say 4 months, 4th month. And then, but now I'm going to double these 16th days. When I do that, it's not going to give me a date that I can use. It's going to give me 32 days. So this doesn't really work if I do it this way. But then I thought another way to do it is I would just add 2 months and add 16 days. So that was a simpler way to do it. Now I could do it this way if I carry this over and realize that April has 30 days. So I could just do this. I could take out this 30, and then I would write the 5th month and the 2nd day. So when I did that, and I could do it other ways, but that's just the way I did it. And I went over to here, I saw from here to here is 2 months and 16 days. That is, I took the February date and I added this. Now we can know that this is a date. This is not the number of days from January 1st to February 16th. This is just a date. So I'm adding the symbolism of this date to this date to get this date. So it's a very odd way. At first when I did it, it seemed kind of odd. But, and I can't remember if I had already done it with this date. I don't think so. I think that actually came after. I'm pretty sure it did, because I'd never thought of the idea of doubling the date before. So I must have come up with the doubling of this date to get this date. So I think even at this time, I still didn't really know what to do with June 27th. So I hadn't doubled this. So this was all kind of happening pretty quick. So now I had 2 months and 16 days. And then, well, I was told to double it twice. So then I counted from May 2nd, and that's easier. You go May, June, July, that's 2 months. You add 16 days, that's July 18th. So 2 months and 16 days. So when you do that, you can see that May 2nd is the center of a chiasm. And we already know that that was the topic of his May 2nd letter, was the chiasm in 31 AD. So So this to me then suggested that this was the prediction before midnight. Now, there's more significance that we can gather from this. One is we can see that there's a progression of understanding that occurs. So, Samuel Snow, he understands this before, he gives his testimony, he decides on January 1st that he's going to write this out, he writes it out, he gets it published, and everything is significant. Every date that he writes something, every date he publishes something becomes significant. And then it ends up culminating to this July 18th. So I would still argue that July 18th is the prediction before midnight. Now, it's tied together in this structure with May 2nd as the center. So part of it is I was trying to reconcile Tabo with Doy and Dewey, saying, look, you're arguing about something where you shouldn't be really arguing because you're saying the same thing. If you put May 2nd as the center of the chiasm, it becomes very powerful as a symbol. And May 2nd is powerful as a symbol because its connection to April 19th. In our history, in here, April 19th and May 2nd are 13 days apart. But the Julian and Gregorian are 12 days apart. But in our history, May 2nd is April 9th on the Julian calendar. So one is you can tie this May 2nd symbol with April 19th. You can also put it at the center of this chiasm. And May 2nd was also around the time in 2017. It was in the middle of this history in 2017 where we came to understand the prediction before midnight. So I would argue this is all the PBM, but the fact that July 18th is 3 days before midnight gives it a special significance. Now, I would say that regarding chiasms, we have the statement that was made, which Jeff made, and he said that the center of the chiasm is the most important. And I wrote an email, Bronwyn read it, and Jeff's. And in my email, I said, it's not necessarily the most important date, but it is the key that unlocks the significance of the structure. And if you think about this, July 18th, we would have to say now that that's the most important symbol in regarding our prediction. So if you're going to talk about a prediction before midnight that was made before whatever you call midnight, November 9th, it was definitely connected with the July 18th prediction. But without this structure, without the cross of Christ, of course, the cross of Christ is the thing that unlocks all chiasms and all prophecy and all mysteries, right? So here, the fact that May 2nd is the center, and it's about this Passover, and it's about the center of the 70th week, and there's just all these connections. When we get to this confirming of the covenant, July 18th letter of Snow's, this becomes an extremely powerful symbol, but its power is magnified by this key, and in a sense, it wouldn't be as significant. Imagine if we had not understood the structure of Samuel Snow's letters, and maybe you think that it's not that important because you didn't know about it. But this structure here opened up a whole bunch of light that even if we don't know about it directly, indirectly influenced many things that we were doing. It definitely influenced our understanding of the November 9th prediction. We couldn't have actually confirmed it without my understanding of how this worked. I wouldn't have had the basis to do a lot of the things that I did. And this July 18th prediction, when we made this July 18th prediction, and I'm trying to see how much time I have. I know I got a bit of time. So I'm going to kind of jump ahead without a lot of explanation. Yeah, so we got about a half an hour, so I can do a lot of explanation here, I guess, just not everything. So, as I said, I presented the July 18th as the prediction before midnight as part of this structure on September 23rd, 2017. And that's going to be significant. I presented the 777 chiasms, a part of the bigger structure of chiasms, for September 23rd, 2017. That Lambert presentation is also connected with Revelation 12, false prophecy, regarding September 23rd, 2017. It's partially true, partially false. But anyway, we have this July 18th. And this is what's going to happen in 2018, is that I'm now going to see, based on a structure that happens here, and I'm not going to explain it in detail, but I'm going to go through it. So without it, we wouldn't have had the witness for July 18th. Now, there's more. So I think that people need to read Samuel Snow's letters. We need to understand this structure. But even when we did this structure, I had this chiasm. I also had the chiasm here. So we have this chiasm here, where this is midnight, right? So we have a chiasm here. And now we see we have another chiasm in Millerite history, which is from Samuel Snow's letters. But when in 2018, so this isn't really a study in Ezra, and I just want to touch on it. I don't want to go through everything. But we know in 2018 that we had this structure. So this is part of a chiasm that Jeff uses. And we had, well, let's put it this way. We'll do his whole structure. I'll see how much I can get done. So this, again, it doesn't relate to Ezra. This will not be the first thing you show somebody once you show them Samuel Snow's letters. But what you want to see is that there's this structure, and you're setting a foundation for them to understand other things. So we have this structure here where we had June 9th, and this is 2018, and we had August 11th, 2018, and we had October 13th, 2018. So in 2018, we have these two periods of 63 days. And this structure came about because of Daniel from Brazil using July 27th. Well, he didn't use it. This is just on July 27th. He counted from June 10th ordinally to October 13th and said that the midnight cry would be given at Lambert Church on October 13th, 2018. He ended up being the one who presented that day. He thought it would be Tess or Parminder, making a prediction. That's when they would unfold this idea of what was ever going to happen in the future. So he had this July 27th where he made this prediction. Now, I also had on October 13th, I counted 391 days. I'm going to do this to November 9th, 2019. Now, technically, I counted from noon to midnight, commencing 391.5 days. And so we understood this structure here. Now, we'll deal with the rest of it a bit later, but this structure here, Jeff uses as part of his chiasm. He also puts in September 7th and March 27th. But let's just deal with this part of it now. So this is what I knew. In October 13th, I figured this out. I came to recognize that August 11th was the center of this 126 days. But I had also done something else. On October 13th, when I looked at this, I didn't like this 126 days, because when I saw the 391.5, I compared this to the kings of Judah. So I knew that there was 391.5 years from Rehoboam to Zedekiah. That was 391.5 years, and that it was preceded by 43 periods of 40 years, which is Saul, David, and Solomon. And so I like the idea of having 120 days, So when I counted back, I didn't count back the 126 days initially. I said, well, if we have 391 and a half days this way, we should have a date here, which would be June 15th. And so I have 120 days going here. So I got this 120, which is going to leave you these 6 days here. And there was a number of other things that I noticed as I went through this. I noticed that, well, I didn't notice them until later. So I have this structure. So this is what I had on October 13th. I presented it at the camp meeting starting on October 16th. We had the camp meeting, but I presented the week of Christ first, and then I presented this later on Wednesdays and Thursdays, or Wednesday and Friday, or something like that. So anyway, we had this structure. Now, what ended up happening is I ended up then studying Ezekiel and recognizing July 18th. So the thing about July 18th that was interesting, so I'll get rid of this. So we had July 18th, and I'm not going to draw it in here. What ended up happening is that I put July 18th as a Julian date. And the symbol that we used there, so this is not this study, so if somebody's just been watching these videos, you're not going to have any of this in there. But July 18th was a Julian date. And so what I did is I recognized July 18th was this date from Samuel Snow's letters. So what I did then is I put July 18th on a line like this, and I put it below November 9th, and I counted 391.5 days. And when I did that, I came to June 22nd. So June 22nd, of course, is the Pentecost letter. Now, from June 22nd to July 18th is, I think it's like 30 days almost. 22nd, 29 days or something like that. But the thing is, here I actually have an extra year in between. I have 365 days added to that. But that wasn't really the main issue. Once I had June 22nd, I then could recognize that I could put these other dates on this line. So I could mark this as February 16th. And there would be 6 days, just like there is here, to February 22nd. I know I'm writing this pretty small, but I have that 6 days. I could also find that I could put July 27th would line up with April 3rd, and that August 11th would line up with April 19th, and that if I put 13 days after that, from August 11th to August 11th Julian, I could also have that line up with May 2nd. Now, some of these weren't exactly to the day. If you compared these exactly, you'll see that some of these I count ordinally and some are cardinally. But they're so close as a template that it's impossible to ignore. And so then I recognized that Samuel Snow's letters were the same structure as this prediction connected with November 9th. Now, this is not well understood. Most people, I would say most people in this message have no idea about this, even though they may have heard about it, seen it, because even if they saw it presented, they wouldn't remember it. It's a little bit complicated. But this to us was a testimony of July 18th, Julian, which is July 31st, and it's the 10th day of the 5th month. So it's July 31st, and it's the 10th day of the 5th month in 2020. So that's a whole other study, which we have done. But also I saw the structure of Samuel Snow's letters. And Elder Jeff was there when I presented this, and I actually didn't see it until I presented it. That is, I was presenting it and recognizing it as I was presenting it. So I was pretty blown away by it, which doesn't happen often, but a little bit emotionally overwhelmed by what I was seeing. I just thought that this was crazy, that this could happen. So we could then see that July 18th, in connection with Samuel Snow's letters, shows us that this is connected with November 9th prediction, and that you can't separate July 18th and November 9th as being the midnight cry that was given on October 13th. So this to me is a very, very strong witness that these two are connected. Now we know that eventually I found July 18th was part of this other structure. I didn't find it. Stephen and Odilia, Stephen mostly, I guess. This other structure where you have, whoops, I'm doing this wrong. You have July 18th, and then you have 252 days, and then you have March 27th, and then you have 273 days, and then you have December 25th, 2021. This is 2021. This is 2020. And this is a period of 777 days, right? Now, so this becomes extremely important when we have this November 9th structure, the Samuel Snow's letters. And again, we haven't presented this in a major way. It isn't, a lot of people don't know about this, this witness to July 18th. But this was the witness to me why I couldn't just accept November 9th and reject July 18th. They were tied together. And, and I know that probably Tess never looked at this, Parminder never looked at this, Cabo never looked at this. None of the leadership even looked at this to see it. They wouldn't have watched the videos. The Tabo, he had no interest at all in looking at anything I presented ever. So now we have this whole structure, but it gets buried right away. So it gets buried. Very few people know about it even now. So we have this witness of November 9th and July 18th as part of the same message. But it's all about Samuel Snow's letters. And if you're looking at this idea about the prediction before midnight, you definitely have to say that we're predicting November 9th, which is midnight, and it's connected with July 18th, part of this structure. So this has to be the prediction before midnight. Now, the other thing is we see the significance here of June 22nd becomes even more powerful, because now we have another chiasm in Samuel Snow's letters. That is, we have a chiasm, and Elder Jeff has presented this, where from May 2nd to April 19th, from April 19th to, where do we do this? Because this is from here to here to here, pardon me, is 126 days. And from April 19th to June 22nd is 63 days. And from February 16th to April 19th is 63 days. So we have another chiasm, another 63 with 126. So Elder Jeff has presented that. He hasn't presented this, but he has presented the fact that this part of the chiasm existed in our line, and it existed in Samuel Snow's letters. So we have this other chiasm, part of what we call the midnight chiasm, right? I think this is what he calls the midnight chiasm. The Levitical chiasm is the one with the 3 March 27ths. And so part of the midnight chiasm, of course, is this, but there's also this other structure here where you have 63 days from September 7th. And I was at noon calculating this 63 days in this period of time here, which is 47 weeks, and it's also 329 days, with the centers being March 27th, 2019. So this connects to this March 27th, 2021, and we understood this on March 27th, 2020, the connection between these two March 27ths. So there's a whole bunch of connections. We start to get these wheels within wheels and all this structure that exists. And we know the other 63 days is on the side of this going to January 11th, 2020. And that connection has to do with the unfolding of light from September 7th to January 11th, 2020. So we have all this structure, but this is really dependent on Samuel Snow's letters. And that's what I'm trying to emphasize here, is that Samuel Snow's letters, the understanding of Samuel Snow's letters, has been neglected in this movement because it was buried soon after. Elder Jeff has presented it. Very few people fully understand it. And even though we have the resources, there's so much stuff happening, so much light, that this sort of seems like something old to go back to. But I still think there's going to be light that comes from an understanding of Samuel Snow's letters. Obviously, it definitely helps us understand September 7th better and January 11th. And then, of course, the Levitical chiasm would not be understood without March 27th. Because that's what it's about, the message to the Levites. Now, I do have another study, which I did as a Friday night Vesper. So anybody who wants to watch that one, it's on the 777 chiasm, but it's showing that there is actually 4 of these 777s in our line. And they start with December 21st, 2012. And now, I don't know if Jeff is working his way towards them or whether he just thinks that's too much to show people. He said he was going to watch my video, and it seems that he is presenting material that would lead to looking at that. But it's really going to help us understand July 18th better. And the significance of Samuel Snow's letters can't be neglected. So if we look at Samuel Snow, so let's just kind of sum this up. So if we look at Samuel Snow, he's typified by Ezekiel. We know that because of the 5th day of the 4th month. He's a movement within the Millerite movement. He's a person, but he's a movement within it, and he symbolizes our movement within Seventh-day Adventism. So he symbolizes the priests. He's going to give a message to the Millerites. The priests are going to give a message to the Levites. His letters are the way that they're expressed chronologically, show the significance of each of these letters, the content of the letters, but also the dates of the letters are important. And they end with July 18th, which is the prediction before midnight. And so he then, without all those letters and that development of understanding, he can't stand up at Boston on July 21st and give the midnight cry. He also can't do that at Exeter as well. So they have to have this development that occurred. And so if we look at our line in our history, we can actually go back and look at Samuel Snow's letters and see that there's a development that happened in our history. And that development began in 2012. So in 2012 is important. That's when Elder Jeff was presenting Habakkuk's 2 tables. So 2012 is significant in that way. And we can actually go back to June 22nd, 2012. That was when the first Habakkuk's 2 tables was published or online. So I think they actually occurred before then, but their actually publishment was June 22nd, if I remember correctly. So we can even go back to June 22nd, 2012, and see that symbol is there. But there was a whole bunch of events that unfolded in 2012 that led to what then happened from 2012 onwards, so 2013, 2014, 2015. These are all chronological structures that we can look at, and we can see the significance of these events. And they all relate to the prediction that we're making and to give us evidence to whether or not that prediction is true. And that's really where we have to go. So this part of Samuel Snow's letters, even though it seems a little difficult, there's a lot of dates to remember. I think if you read through the letters and get the context and try to understand what was developing at the different times, you'll probably get some insights that will help you remember these things. Obviously, the structure itself is simple if you remember the 2 chiasms, the one with April 19th as the center, the other with May 2nd as the center, and you draw them out a few times, label the letters. And when you look at the letters, you can go to the calendar converter, look up those dates. Some of them might be incorrect because I haven't checked them all. The calendar converter does not work 100% perfectly before, like from the last 7 months of the year. It's not adjusting for the sighting of the new moon, so I can't remember if it does it correctly. And I didn't even really deal with the date of his first letter because it's maybe not that important. But the other dates of his letters should line up. So the third day of the 12th month for his September 22nd letter, and so on, should all line up. So is there any questions regarding these letters? Anything that I didn't make clear enough? Or any thoughts or insights that come as you look at this right now? Anything I should cover that I didn't? Stephen, you have any thoughts? Or are you still awake? Not awake.
Yeah, I'm still awake.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts? Anything that you've noticed? Or is it too much for you?
Well, it's good to review. There's some insights there you shared, things I didn't realize, just how things came about.
Okay.
And so I'm interested in why Tabo, he's connecting at May. Was he expecting something to happen on May the 2nd, 2017?
Wasn't predicting any events. So, Tabo wasn't the one who actually came up with the prediction before midnight. I think it was Blessings who did. But Tabo was promoting it at the time. And he actually had a bit of a fallout with Parminder over it because Parminder didn't accept the PBM at all. So I know that the idea was it was just the May 2nd letter was the one, that he thought was important. And he didn't like anybody else choosing other letters and then trying to draw attention to them because that was taking attention away from what he was saying. And that's the only reason that I could think that he didn't like what was happening. And there probably was a little bit of infighting. Obviously, Dwayne Dewey in presenting July 18th in opposition to Tabo. They weren't predicting any events with them. And they shouldn't have been in opposition. They should have been, and the work that I did should have been seen as complementary. We should have said, there's this whole development of this message. But I was seeing significance. There's one other point that I haven't addressed, and that's May 2nd letter, with the one with the fake news, the death decree, Pontius Pilate, or the death decree, about the crucifixion of Christ. This death decree was fake news. And at that time, there was fake news going around that, and I maybe have touched on a little bit, but just haven't shown the significance of it. So we had some fake news in connection with our PBM. And that fake news had to do with what was happening in Russia. So a lot of Adventists had caught up with this idea, and there was some false news articles saying that what was happening to the Jehovah's Witnesses, the persecution that they were experiencing, was happening to Seventh-day Adventists. So the General Conference wrote a letter in response to this and said, we are not being persecuted in Russia because we're complying with all of their laws and restrictions. So some of the restrictions is they were not allowed to promote outside of their church. And if they did, they could have their buildings confiscated. There was a lot of things that they couldn't do. I can't remember all the details of the restrictions, but they definitely weren't allowed to evangelize. And so Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, didn't comply, and they ended up having their church buildings taken away from them. But Seventh-day Adventists did comply. And of course, that to me, just that response, that the church was willing to compromise just to get along with the government, said something about the government. It said something about our history of how the church is going to respond when persecution does come. They will just comply. We're not going to fight against the government in any way. They say we can't evangelize, even though that's supposed to be our main purpose in existence. We'll just do whatever they say. So I found that was interesting as well. But yeah, we weren't predicting dates in the future, so we weren't attaching anything to those as far as, when something's going to happen. But to me, it seemed like what was unfolding in 2017 was actually occurring as a symbol to the movement and to the church. And now I understand a lot more about it, so I'm going to go into that in more detail in other places, and I'm going to look at each of these dates in 2017 and show you that there's a significance of when things occurred in 2017 in connection with the prediction before midnight, which is July 18th. So it's how it's all connected to July 18th. So there was a groundwork being done in 2017 for me personally, so that I would actually be able to accept what happened on October 13th, so that I could be a part of it. I wouldn't have, if I had never had those experiences, I hadn't seen Samuel Snow's letters, I hadn't worked with dates in the way that I had, dealing with Samuel Snow's letters and so forth, that there would have been no way that I would have been able to see the 391.5 days from October to 13th to November 9th as being part of a structure. I might have been able to count those days and know that that's the same number of days as the kings of Judah, but it was the structure of Samuel Snow's letters that led me to understand that was correct. And so that to me was very, very important. And it was to Jeff too initially. And I think he understands parts of it. So, so some people know about these other things. I mean, they know, how we came to the prediction in some ways, but there's so much underneath, so much background information and pieces of the puzzle that had to be put into place before we could even make that July 18th, 2020 prediction. So for some people, they see it looks like a leap, it just came out of nowhere. But actually, and Stephen, of course, knows this quite well, that a lot of this groundwork, because he was a part of it, was already being laid. He doesn't know all of it, now he knows maybe a bit more. But all this groundwork was being laid for a long time. So when we get to that prediction, we have really solid precedents that have been set in biblical history and in our own history and in Millerite history, that we can now with confidence say this chronology is pointing to this event. And so that's the thing why we need to understand Ezra, because it's going to support the 2300 days and the 70 weeks. But it also gives us this way of explaining things or of proving things that Adventists never used. Adventists did not use chiasms in 457 BC to support the 2300 days and the 70 weeks. They didn't use dates in symbols as the way that we do. So I just think it becomes extremely, it's a necessary tool. Like if you're going to present July 18th to people, you have to present, Ezra 7 to 10, hopefully all of Ezra. And it definitely helps to show the story of Joseph and Jacob, which we did in the joining of the two sticks. And it's also necessary to show Millerite history and Samuel Snow's letters. But you can't understand Samuel Snow's letters without understanding Ezra's chronology. It just doesn't work. You could put them there and you can show these connections of these dates, like you can show that they're chronologically structured, but people can say, so what? But if you can connect it to 457 BC, you now have had this witness regarding this. So, when you get to, all these symbols, the 5th day of the 4th month, 10th day of the 7th month, you're adding up dates, you're doing all these things, you're doing something that's extremely convincing to people, because I've done it. When you show people these things, if they're open-minded, somebody's closed-minded, it's not going to help. But somebody who's open-minded, they see it. They say, this is impossible. This could not be unless it's designed. And it all fits together. And we still don't even understand the half of it. I mean, I've probably forgotten half of it. But that's not even all of it, because I've never known all of it. And so, God is definitely developing this message in a powerful way, so that when we get to July 18th, we're going to be sure about what we're saying. That's my belief, that we're going to have an assurance of it. But we're going to have to go through some struggles first before we get there. And that's why I think June 27th is important, which I've talked about in my other studies. It's the publication of Samuel Snow's June 22nd letter, but it's connected. And so June 22nd and June 27th are about this movement, the priests, and March 27th is about the Levites. And these two symbols are extremely important in understanding our role, our mission, and also just to affirm the message that we're giving, the chronology. So hopefully that helps. I know it's a lot of information. We will be going through this again on Sundays because there's a lot of things I've left out. So I was able to add a lot more than I thought I would be able to. So any final thoughts or questions? If not, we can close with prayer, and then we can say our goodbyes. So, okay, let's kneel for prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are again so thankful for the light that you have shone upon our path, and the way that Scripture and inspiration has woven these things together, these truths. And we know that the cross of Christ is the center of all these things, that the death of your Son upon the cross for our sins is pivotal, it's fundamental, it's the basis of all things, and we're thankful for that. We pray that you can be with each person, be with us as we interact with others throughout this day. For those that are going to bed, give them a good rest, and help us, Lord, to share these things, to understand them so that we can share them, and that your Holy Spirit can always be speaking through us as we talk to others. Again, we pray and thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.